During webinar 1, we went through the 6 different components. And what I want to do today is I want to focus in on 2 of these components. The first one is your air. As we had discussed, air provides 2 purposes. One is it takes the water out of the bin. So it's a conveyor to get the water out of the bin, but it also is a pipeline to get your energy into the bin. Here's a typical grain bin. And ultimately, you've got liquid water that's in your grain mass. And the trick here is, how do you get your water to move? How can you remove it out of your bin? The key to that is phase conversion. You have to add energy to convert that liquid water to a vapor. And it is very simple science, and it's very repeatable and consistent. Once you've converted that water to a vapor, you need to have enough airflow to transport that water out of your bin. And really that is, in a nutshell, the science of removing water from your bin. But what I like to do is I like to use an analogy. It's a bucket elevator analogy, which kind of brings in all the different components of your air. So the key with air is that the warmer the air, the higher the carrying capacity. So you can hold a lot more water in the air when you're at 30 degrees compared to when you're at 1 degree. So what that refers to is warm air is a big bucket in your bucket elevator. Now, how full is the bucket with water? That relates to your humidity. So if you have 100% humidity, your bucket is right full. If you have 20% humidity, your bucket is just barely full at all. So you've got 2 factors. One is how big your bucket is and how full it is. And these things make a huge impact on the effectiveness of your drying system. And then the last component of your bucket elevator is how fast is this thing turning? How many buckets per minute are you actually removing? And that really comes down to your airflow. The perfect analogy there is how many CFM per bushel you're moving. If you're moving 1 CFM per bushel versus a half a CFM per bushel, you're going to be removing twice the amount of water. And it really is a simple proportional relationship. So that sort of takes into account the actual water removal, but now how about the energy side of things? And there really are 3 scenarios for energy. We talked about this first scenario, no energy input. This is the instance when you've taken off your grain, it's nice and warm, a 30-degree day, you bin it, and you're maybe a point or a point and a half tough. So what you're gonna do is cool the grain. And in this instance, you have enough energy to vaporize your water, and all that's required is airflow. You've got a cold air coming in, and that cold air is equivalent to a small bucket. And so you're bringing a small amount of water into the bin because of this low carrying capacity. As the air moves through the warm grain, the bucket increases because the air takes that energy and it picks up that moisture. And as the air warms, the bucket gets larger, and ultimately the carrying capacity is increased. So you end up removing water, and this has been proven. Ron Palmer at Indian Head, this was his I guess realization, and it kind of created the whole idea that cooling grain is drying grain, and that is absolutely the truth, as long as you have enough energy in the grain mass. Now, if you don't have enough energy in the grain mass, and let's say you cool your grain and you still are a point tough, well, now you have to add some additional energy. And the second scenario is adding ambient air heat. So that is what you would consider natural air drying, so no supplemental heat. Now, when we're doing this process, again, we're gonna have to warm the grain. So we're gonna have to add energy to the grain, and we're gonna be bringing in warmer air. So when you're bringing warm air into the bin, you will 9 times out of 10 be bringing more water into the bin. And what is really tricky with natural air drying is the ratio of the amount of water you're bringing in compared to the amount of energy. Sometimes it isn't enhancing your drying. So sometimes you're bringing in more water than energy, but ultimately you're going to warm the grain, and as that air is cooled, because you are taking energy out of the ambient air and adding it to the grain, so the air temperature is dropping, your bucket is getting smaller, and in many instances you're actually dropping water into the grain. So in this instance, often what you're going to be doing is you're going to be adding water to the grain mass, but that isn't always the case. And that's the tricky thing with natural air drying, is it's going to cycle, and sometimes you're going to be bringing in more moisture than energy, and you're going to actually be reducing or increasing the moisture content. But in the long run, you absolutely need that energy to reduce the to vaporize your water and to get the water out of your grain bin. But you can see by doing it with natural air, it is a huge benefit to have proper instrumentation on the bin, so you know when you're adding water to the bin and when you're actually removing water to the bin. It just, you know, there are a lot of complexities when you don't use supplemental heat, and it really is an inefficient way to do it unless you're very early in the season. With natural air drying, one of the very common, and I guess this is the current smart technologies that are associated with starting and stopping fans to allow you to dry your grain. They relate to your equilibrium moisture content, and ultimately that whole logic is basically saying that like if we take 60% humidity day, and if you say that you're running at 5 degrees, it says that your equilibrium moisture content is 14.6. So for wheat, that basically is where you want to be. And so then the logic would say, yep, let's run our fan, and let's remove moisture. The problem with this logic is it doesn't take into account how big your bucket size is when you're running your fan at 5 degrees C. So you are potentially taking some moisture out, but you're taking it out at such a slow rate with these low temperatures that that is actually costing you significant money. And that's where having a real-time readout of what your cost per point per bushel is, whether you have supplemental heat, whether you have just your natural air drying, is a huge benefit, so that you know exactly what your economics are for the process. Now the third and the most common, I guess from our experience, the best scenario for repeatable and predictable in-bin drying is the use of supplemental heat. Again, you're warming the grain, but the difference is you are adding significant amount of BTUs with very little additional water. If you have a dry supplemental heating system, you're adding no water, but even if you are adding some water, the ratio is such that you always will be warming the grain, and so you will always have a big bucket. Oh, sorry, I went too far there. Here, you will always be warming grain, so the air will cool, and your grain mass will warm up, and you will very predictably add water. I'm getting lost here. Okay, you will very predictably have water removed, and the key there is that you're adding BTUs without any moisture, and that creates predictability. It creates a really dependable, reliable drying system. This mouse is acting up. So that really kind of summarizes the bucket elevator. And